Welcome to Piecemeal, a podcast hosted by the Emily Program where we put it all together for you. Piecemeal discusses topics related to eating disorders, body image issues, and how society may contribute to distorted thinking. Please keep in mind that we may discuss difficult topics and that we ask that you use your own discretion when listening and that you speak with a therapist as needed. I'm your host, Jillian Lampert. Today, we can't wait to hear Katie's story, which will include a discussion about body trust and the many other gifts she has found in recovery. Katie is a registered nurse and a yoga teacher whose understanding of what it means to care for bodies, both her own and others, has been deeply shaped by her journey of recovering from anorexia. She cares about walking alongside others struggling with eating disorders and hopes that by sharing her story, she can offer hope and support, which we know is so important. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Katie.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, we are excited to dive in. You know, before we unwrap some of the gifts that we spoke to earlier, Katie, let's just begin with an introduction to the eating disorder that presented itself first. You know, can you tell us about your eating disorder and what do you remember about life with the eating disorder?
Yeah. My eating disorder emerged my freshman year of high school, and it started as a kind of innocent desire to improve how I was performing athletically. What I was achieving in sports was a big part of my 15-year-old identity at the time. And I was playing club soccer and running track for my high school and kind of intimidated by the older athletes and wanted to succeed and just had this idea that maybe if I started to control my nutrition, that might change my fitness and improve my performance. But very, very quickly, I became extremely controlling and restrictive in how much I was eating and how much I was exercising. And kind of before I knew it, those like control seeking behaviors were controlling me. And it showed up in my body pretty fast. For a very brief period, was performing better. And then I stopped having periods and I stopped having energy. Unfortunately, the like loss of my period was kind of affirmed by the like coaches and my teammates as this like sign of peak fitness, which makes me so sad looking back on it. My parents, though, were very perceptive and had me in outpatient eating disorder care right away. So before I even knew really that I was dealing with something scary and serious, there was, weekly appointments and weight checks and a meal plan and all these things. And I kind of like did this tenuous dance for a couple of years where I I really wanted to please my treatment team and my parents and my coaches. I remember not wanting to be sick. I wanted to participate in my life and be a normal high schooler. But I also, an eating disorder had a grip on me. And so I was kind of playing this game of also trying to appease it. My coaches and my parents were monitoring me in a way that if I like didn't meet X exchanges or my weight dropped to this amount, I would kind of be like pulled from sports that week. So it was an ongoing and like constant power struggle. And that continued until the day before homecoming, my junior year. I went to a doctor's appointment and was sent straight to the hospital. My heart rate had read really like concerningly low when they took my vitals in the clinic. I was told you need to be admitted. And that hospitalization, it felt like the darkest, rockiest bottom I could have ever imagined. I'd reached a place where I was so terrified of food that I quite literally had to be coached like for each bite. And I was very depleted and exhausted and lost and so scared. Though that was the beginning of like climbing out of the pit of anorexia that I had found myself in. And something about the hospital environment moved me. I was witnessing the community of care and hope that exists inside hospital walls. And like a seed of something in me felt like I could come back here someday to support others. I left the hospital and went to residential treatment for 3 months as a teenager, out of state, like the first time I had been away from family. And I relearned how to eat and I relearned how to rest. And I came home like ready to engage in my life again and had like a really lovely year and a half or so of recovery where I was able to go back to high school and play sports in a healthy way and be part of my relationships. And I graduated and went to nursing school. So moved away from home, moved a couple hours away from home, ready to like begin this new chapter of my life and kind of like proud of the recovery I had. That was part of my path going forward too, was the foundation of this story. But away from the like scaffolding of support that I had at home, some old patterns of like restriction and exercise started sneaking in. And it was different enough from how it manifested when I was a high schooler that I didn't really think it was an eating disorder. I just thought, I liked to eat mostly green things and I needed to run a lot to deal with the stress of nursing school, and that was just healthy living and it was okay for me. And I was so wrong. It was so not okay. But it was almost like my eating disorder snuck in the back door, and I didn't realize it was threatening me until I was in a full-blown relapse. So by the fall of my junior year of college, I was in an like oppressively dark place, totally smothered by my eating disorder. And ironically, I was taking psych nursing that quarter. And I remember sitting in class and looking at the global assessment of functioning, the GAF scale, and just watching myself week by week being like, oh, I'm in like the 60 range. And I just felt like such a fraud because I was doing these like psychiatric clinicals, trying to learn how to help people who were struggling with mental illness and knowing I was getting like deeper and deeper into my own. I was just living in a constant like fog of terror. I was disconnected from my body and my relationships and my values. I was afraid of my body, and I was afraid of the choices I was making, but I didn't know how to stop them. And it was becoming more and more apparent actually that I couldn't stop them on my own. I remember laying in bed at night and being afraid I wouldn't wake up. And I knew my body couldn't continue to endure the like deprivation and exertion that my eating disorder was demanding. I was just unsafe, and I knew it. I also was deeply ashamed of the relapse. I hadn't felt that kind of shame in my eating disorder before because it had never been a secret since my parents had recognized it right away. But this time I didn't I didn't want to let people in. I felt like I had had my chance. So many people had supported me before, and I thought I had really let them down. And I was supposed to have like closed that chapter and be moving towards my career. So I thought my life was over and my dreams were canceled, and I was ashamed to ask for help. But I remember like sitting shaking and crying in the dean's office to ask for like leave to go to treatment, and just being met by only grace and warmth and support. And that was a theme like in the hardest of the hard. I think when I talk about like gifts of recovery, I also like would love for people to hear that there were gifts even in those like hardest hard, that like goodness was still there. And from like my kind patient boyfriend who didn't give up on me to my like amazingly steady loving dad who insisted on getting on the plane with me to take me to residential, like my college advisor, and then the staff at the residential center that I went back to who remembered me and just meted me with such like kindness and welcome. It was communicated to me in a really loving way that I was the only person who was ashamed of me and the only person who was disappointed. Residential treatment as a now young adult was like challenging in a different way. I think I was smarter in that I had more self-awareness, but I also was a little more resistant, a little more skeptical. So it was harder to trust the process that second time. But again, it was just one of the most transformative, love-filled experiences I've ever had. I think that there really aren't words to describe the like immense relief and connection you feel when you sit down at a table with 10 other people who know exactly what you're feeling. That kind of support is irreplaceable. And those relationships were the most intimate and meaningful, I think, that I'll ever experience. I also think about like the opportunity to go to treatment and like have to kind of surrender all the external things that I thought defined who I was and realize that I was still like valued and I was still myself and I could sit with so much discomfort and tolerate it. I mean, I think that's such a gift. Most people don't have that opportunity. And I think that like to be able to do that work in such a supported place is, I mean, it's just invaluable. I returned to school 3 months later after that round of treatment and was still kind of like stumbling through my way through recovery, but I was able to engage in my life and my goals and my relationships again with new hope and new strength.
Oh, Katie, that's such a thank you for sharing all that. It's such a beautiful picture you've painted of such difficult times and isolation and then hope and love and connection. It's just incredible. I I just want to highlight a couple of the amazing things that I heard in that it so struck me that when you were describing the shame that you felt with relapse, that's so common for people to experience that, and it is also so common for when people reach out and say, oh, I can't believe I've relapsed or this has happened, for them to receive that like it's okay, that happens, like that's part of the
Yeah.
illness, right? It's not just oh, you have an eating disorder, we apply this thing, this treatment, and then you go on and everything's fine. And for some people that's how it happens, and that's okay. For
Mhm.
most people, recovery, like we've said often in this podcast, recovery is not linear, and that's how these illnesses work, and that's an unfortunate part of eating disorders. And eating disorders are tenacious, fierce illnesses that do not want to let go easily, and they require a lot of support so that we can really help them to let go. And we certainly believe that's possible and full recovery is possible. But I think the poignancy of how that must have felt for you to feel so ashamed of not having done it when, right, as a treatment provider and just another human with the experience of an eating disorder, like, no, it's okay, it's how it works, unfortunately. So that was just so beautiful. And the descriptions of the loss of connection are really striking to me. That, and I heard it in a number of things that you said, even from the beginning, when physiologically you were disconnected from things like menstruation that are supposed to happen. And yes, now we understand so much more that they are supposed to happen in well-trained athletes, that it should be normal that well-trained athletes who menstruated regularly should continue to do so in athletic competition, that it's not just a like, oh no, that's fine, it's not fine. And so that there's so many even physical ways that we get disconnected. But the this theme of disconnection is pretty prevalent in a lot of the ways we think about eating disorders, right? They separate us from our connections with ourselves, certainly, and that sense of who am I, what do I want to do, how does this work. Our bodies, things like what happens to our body as the eating disorder progresses, and then we go through recovery. And a really critical part of recovery is repairing that distance and reconnecting, reintegrating. So let's talk a little bit about developing that trust, that body trust and appreciation. What kind of experiences have you had that were particularly helpful in really learning to trust your body, trust yourself?
Yeah. Gosh, it's been the actually learning to trust my body has been such a long up and down healing process. When I left formal treatment, I did not trust it. I had existed at that point for the better part of 8 years in this structure of like weight checks and meal plans and really intensive monitoring. And a dietitian had been like the primary source of authority in my life for so long. Like I was used to somebody keeping really close tabs on me, and I think I had a little bit of a belief that it would be possible to just listen to my body and let it do its thing. But that felt really far from my grasp. One thing that really was like revolutionary for me was a practice of yoga. Yoga has taught me to exist in my body without needing to control it. it's taught me to really listen and respond to how it wants to move and adjust, and to notice and respond without reacting in fear and judgment. A like softer, more gracious way of being embodied that is just completely opposite from what my life in an eating disorder was like. And like the practice of being able to stay with sensations and like use my breath to anchor and not try to like run away from what I'm feeling is like a muscle that I feel like I've been able to build through yoga that serves me like in all areas of my life, that I can feel and then stay. And the kind of miraculous thing is that I realized that that mindset of like trust and allowing that I was learning in yoga could apply to my relationship with eating as well. Like that sort of listening is like such a perfect parallel to intuitive eating. And I was really fortunate about a year and a half ago to find a dietitian who embodies that idea in her practice. And at that point, I had been out of treatment for a couple of years, and I was really enjoying a pretty like stable recovery. Had a job. I was happy. Things were going fine. But I still didn't have a period. And so I knew there was another level of restoration, physically at least, that needed to happen. And it was really important to me that my body like functioned on all levels. And my fertility was really important to me. And I thought I had done irreparable damage. So it was like also just this heavy, hard spot for me. But I connected with this dietitian with kind of the idea that maybe there was something like some other way, something more to explore. And she just so graciously held space for me to kind of start deconstructing the like sticky old eating disorder patterns that weren't quite gone. And then also the just like diet culture beliefs that had kind of infiltrated my understanding of what it meant to be healthy and live in a body in our society. And the amazing thing was that the more I like challenged the paradigms, the more I wanted to challenge them and the easier it got. Just like day by day, I was leaving rules behind and resting lots and eating all foods and listening and letting my body change. And the more I did it, the more I like didn't want to stop doing it because I kept just like uncovering new levels of freedom. And my period came back like after 10 years of amenorrhea, it came back, which I just was so affirming, I think, of how resilient our body's ability to heal is, and felt like a message from my body that like we're trusting each other now. Like this is this can work.
That's such a beautiful concept. Like, okay, all right, Katie, we're in this together. That's, body says to mind, like, we're going to be able to do this because it does require so much trust in self, so much trust that our bodies really are there for us, not against us, in a world where that is not the prevailing message, right? That you spoke about the influences of diet culture and just the influences of health messages and even the beauty and embodiment and grounding in yoga that many people find in yoga, even that has in our culture some, has been a fitnessized in a way, right? And so it is a beautiful thing to have that trust and to nurture it. So I imagine that your life in recovery, you've continued to find ways to nurture that trust and to secure it and to keep it close. How does life in recovery contrast for you? How does that compare now to the life that you were experiencing before you were able to have more of that trust?
Yeah, this recovery feels so different than the seasons of like quasi recovery that I had experienced in the past. And I think those seasons had like their place in my journey, but it feels so real. It feels so real now. I have freedom that I just never dreamed possible. And the obsessive like thoughts about food and exercise in my body are not loud. Like I think every once in a while something comes up and I'm like, whoa, what am I even thinking? It's just the volume is so turned down. And I have so much space like in my head and my heart to feel and laugh and love and care. The boyfriend who didn't give up on me all those years ago is now my husband, and I'm madly in love with him. And we love our life together. My life has like color and vibrancy and such richness that you almost don't realize that it's lacking until it just comes rushing back.
That is so true, right? That like in the eating disorder, it feels like, no, no, this is right. This is good. This is fine. This is life. It's totally fine. And then only later do you realize how colorless that is and how colorful and vibrant the world of recovery is. And for some people, it can be really a little overwhelming that that vibrancy is just so much like, oh, it's so bright. And I think the neurobiology of eating disorders is really teaching us that it seems to be true that there are temperament traits that many people who end up having an eating disorder, probably in no small part because they're predisposed to, related to some of those temperament traits in that neurobiology, that noticing that vibrancy is a trait. So if everything seems really bright and loud and fast and the wind is strong and the lights are bright and the sound is a lot and the texture is a lot, and many people speak to sort of a period of accommodating to, wow, that's a bright light and I kind of have to accommodate to this new brighter world. Was that something that you experienced at all in your sort of seeing the world more in bright colors?
Yeah, I am feeling like kind of like realizing a lot as you're saying that because it is so much like feeling like all the things in this world that I was numbed out to, and it is a lot, and I feel sensitive to it, and I also feel like, well, I want that. I am trying to welcome all of it, but yeah, it can feel like a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things that we're learning is an important part of recovery, that we don't want those, bright, beautiful lights and sounds and sensations we have are good. We want them to go away. We're not trying to recover from that. We're trying to sort of fit our way we're wired into the world and just feel some peace with who we are and how we move about the world. And that even can be a gift, I think, as we learn about ourselves more closely through the recovery process. What gifts did the eating disorder and recovery provide for you? We hear that sort of a strong, healthy relationship with food and your body. What else?
Well, it's not a story I would have ever chosen, and certainly not one I would wish on anyone. But I wouldn't undo it. I think it's shaped me. It's grounded my values too. I think because I know how terrible it was to have them compromised, and I mean, it's kind of root. My recovery has rooted me in humility and purpose, and I think grown my empathy in a way that imagine is only really possible through like knowing suffering and having like done the dark seasons. So I think it informs my worldview in that way. I also just like we live in such a diet culture world, and I think having like done the work of recovering from an eating disorder, I'm just so grateful that I know the other option. So that's a gift. I mean, I heard a coworker the other day was like talking about how, I don't know, she was saying something about how she can't have ice cream at home because she doesn't trust herself and blah, blah, blah. And I was like kind of taken aback. I was thinking to myself, I was like, whoa, I have like 5 cartons of ice cream in my freezer because I need variety and I have it whenever I want. It's great. And I'm like having a hard time understanding why that's a problem. Yeah, I'm grateful for the freedom that it's given me in that way.
It is true that the really hard work that people do in recovery does allow for flexibility and freedom and a sense of ability to make decisions based on things that really matter, like what kind of ice cream do I want tonight? And I have choices, and that's amazing. And I think our culture, you're right, is so full of messages about like, oh, you can't have this, you can't have that. And I think also not, our culture's not stellar at helping people to understand that expressing your emotions is a good thing and that knowing your emotions, and a lot of people just don't have the skills to identify their emotions and know what to do next. And that's not something that many people experience in a regular way. And it's really helpful when you have a sense of like, who am I? What do I want? How do I feel? And oh, I know when I feel sad, I need something to soothe myself. And there is absolutely more than one or 100, commercials that will tell you that ice cream is a great way to soothe yourself, and yet not so much, right? That probably isn't going to be fully soothing for people. So it is interesting those sort of gifts that recovery brings us that sometimes make the journey, make the really difficult experience have some of those bright lights. Any other ways that you think that gifts of recovery serve you in your life, in your work, or certainly over the last year and even currently as we're coping with this pandemic? Thoughts on how that has been for you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. One way, I think healthcare can unfortunately be pretty judgmental at times. And I think as someone who knows what it was like to feel like I didn't have control over the choices I was making, I have a pretty nuanced understanding of what choice means. And I think when our patients are like making decisions that don't seem to be supporting their health, or even more challenging to understand, don't seem to be supporting their child's health, it's easy to jump to judgment and kind of be dismissive. And I just like operate under a belief now. I think that what's everyone has things that are hard for them. Like if it's hard, it's hard. And I'm grateful for that perspective because I think it lets me hold a lot of grace for people and care better. And I mean, the journey of my eating disorder and recovery, it's grown my capacity to be with suffering. And I love nursing. I just think that standing in that thin place with people between, I mean, really between life and death and despair and hope, it feels such a privilege. And it's where I want to be even when it breaks my heart. It's the like walking alongside people in illness is terrible and beautiful and just breathtakingly human. Yeah, and this last year with the pandemic has been so hard, like unimaginably hard. And I've had to reflect a lot on what it means to have courage and to show up for people when I'm afraid. And my coping usually feels like this messy, shaky, just trying to put one foot in front of the other and like take a deep breath now and then. But I'm not numbed out and I'm feeling all of it. And I'm connected to my loved ones and I'm connected to the families I'm taking care of. And I mean, like we were saying earlier, it's a lot. It's like a lot of feeling and a lot of grief and just a lot of hard. But I'm present to it and it's the fullness of life that I fought so hard for. And it's so much better than my eating disorder, even when it's a lot to handle. So I'm endlessly grateful for that.
I think that is such an important point to reiterate that, and I we hear it time and time again because I think it's so true that people will say that life without an eating disorder is way better, way better than even those days in the eating disorder that feel like, oh yeah, this is a good day and I'm following all the rules or doing whatever. That recovery is really worth fighting for. It is a better way to live. It's a better experience. And it's hard work. I hear the hard work in so many of the pieces of your story, and that it really supports the notion that it's worth it and you get to have a life that's really different than it could have been. So we often think, Katie, about the, people listen to this podcast and are listening in other ways, and often we'll hear stories from people in recovery and doing pretty well or doing really well. And they think, yeah, that's all fine and well. It's great that was your experience, Katie. It's so beautiful, but that won't be the same for me. I'm in the darkness and I cannot see the light place that you live in. And I don't think that that can happen for me. What would you say to somebody listening that feels that right now?
Yeah, I felt that way for so long. I heard stories and felt exactly that way. I guess I would say that if you're in that dark place, that it's okay. I mean, it's okay to be there, and you don't have to be there alone. I really believe that there's something happening there, like even in those like seasons that feel really like barren, like winter. Like I think that there's growth that we don't always know that it's happening, like under the surface. And so like if you're struggling, I hold that hope for you that it's not lost time, that there's something growing. And I've known that to be true. Like I've lived that to be true, that life comes back and it's not forever. And I mean, the really hard parts are like part of a journey, and part of a journey you're capable of being on and can bear it. It gets better.
Yes, so well said. Katie, thank you so much for sharing your story and your lightness. Your story is inspiring, and there's so much beauty and so much really expressive reflection on the darkness that brought you to where you are. We really appreciate you spending time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. You guys do such good work, and I'm grateful for it. I'm glad to be part of it today.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. If you'd like to learn more about the Emily Program and what we do, visit emilyprogram.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all at Emily Program. Piecemeal is produced by Angie Mitchell and Nancy Linden with music by Dan Forkey. Thanks for listening.